At my parents' anniversary, my husband revealed a secret that ended everything. When the envelope first arrived, I stared at it like it carried something toxic. My parents' 30th wedding anniversary. A special dinner with family cousins, everyone. They made it sound like a celebration, but I knew what it really meant. A trap dressed up as tradition. Anyone else would say yes immediately. Of course, you go to your parents' anniversary party. But anyone else doesn't have my parents. And they don't have a sister like mine. Diana, 2 years younger than me, yet somehow treated like the baby of the house her whole life. My parents say she's fragile, delicate, someone who must be protected from reality. But what they really protect her from is accountability. And in return, she gives them chaos. It's not just her freeloading at home in her 30s, living off their pension, or refusing to hold down a job. I could live with that. It's what she does when my husband is in the room. From the very first day she met him, she leaned in too close, laughed too hard, touched his arm like it belonged to her. She sends him late-night messages he never answers. She blushes at him like a schoolgirl, but smiles like a woman who knows exactly what she's doing. And my parents? They wave it away as a silly crush. That would be bad enough. But what makes my blood boil is how they encourage it. I still hear my mother's voice at our very first family dinner. "You're really funny. Honestly, you'd be a better match for Diana." My father chuckled, added, "They have the same humor. You probably ended up with the wrong daughter." Imagine hearing that as the woman about to marry him. Imagine hearing it again at the altar, my mother pulling my husband aside right before the vows to give him one last chance to walk away. "Are you sure you want to marry Lisa?" she whispered, like she was offering him freedom instead of insulting me. That was the first line I swore I wouldn't let them cross again. And yet for years, they've chipped away at it like termites eating through wood while smiling sweetly at me. So when my mother called, her voice dripping with forced cheer, "You'll come, won't you? Everyone will be asking if you're not there." I felt the old tension coil in my chest. It wasn't a question. It was pressure disguised as love. My husband listened quietly as I recounted the call. He knows this history better than anyone. He's endured the stares, the comments, the staged photos where they tried to push him next to Diana. He's seen me cry after every family event. "I don't want to go," I said finally. "Not again, not this time." He nodded. "Then we won't." Unless what?" He leaned forward, his eyes steady. "Unless we go on our terms. If we skip it, they'll invent their own story. They'll say you're too sensitive or that I control you. But if we go and they try this again, we stop it, out loud." No more whispers. No more laughing it off. His words landed like a stone in my stomach. He was right. They had rewritten every story in our lives. If I didn't show up, they'd rewrite this one too. I thought about sitting at that long table, hearing my mother laugh about Diana's crush in front of everyone. I thought about the cousins smirking, the aunts giggling, my father adding fuel, and me silent shrinking, burning inside. Not this time. This time, if they turned my marriage into a punchline, the whole family would hear the truth. About Diana's texts, about the wedding day whisper, about every inappropriate touch and every time my parents excused it. They'd hear how my parents mocked their own daughter by suggesting she married the wrong man. For once, there would be no room left for their version, only mine. But there's a price for speaking truth out loud in a family like mine. You don't just confront people, you shatter the illusion they've spent years protecting. And when you shatter someone's illusion, they don't thank you. They hate you for it. Still sitting at our kitchen table with that invitation between us, I realized silence had already cost me too much. My peace, my dignity, my belief that my parents could ever respect me. So I looked at my husband, who had been patient through years of insults, and I said, "Okay, we'll go. But if they cross the line, I won't stay quiet." He smiled, not triumphant, but relieved, like he'd been waiting for me to choose myself. "Then we'll be ready," he said. And in that moment, I knew this dinner would not be just another humiliation I swallowed. It would be the night I stopped letting them turn my marriage into their family joke. Because you can only cross a line if someone keeps erasing it for you. And this time, the line was carved deep. To understand why the anniversary invitation felt like walking into a minefield, you'd have to understand how Diana and I were raised. People love to imagine sisters as best friends sharing secrets, under the covers, defending each other at school, cheering each other on. That wasn't us. My parents didn't allow it. Our mother spent years in the military, and she never really left that world behind. Home was a boot camp. Every morning was a competition. Who got up faster? Who brushed their teeth better? Who ran to catch the bus first? It wasn't about fun. It was survival training disguised as parenting. "Look at your sister," Mom would say, tapping her fingernails against the counter as Diana's eyes filled with tears. "Why can't you be more like her?" Those words became the soundtrack of our childhood. At first, it didn't seem so bad. A little rivalry can be normal, right? Maybe even healthy. But slowly, I realized it wasn't about encouraging us to do our best. It was about crushing one of us to lift the other higher. And I just happened to be the one they decided to showcase. I was good with books. I loved learning, solving problems, impressing teachers. I got the grades, the gold stars, the glowing comments on report cards. Diana didn't. She was restless, creative, more alive outside climbing trees than inside reading. School bored her, frustrated her. And that difference painted a target on her back. Mom's punishments were brutal. If Diana failed a test, she wasn't just grounded. Sometimes she was denied dinner. Sometimes she stood in the corner for hours until her knees buckled. I remember sneaking her crackers under the table once, whispering, "Eat fast before Mom comes back." The guilt still lingers because no matter how much I tried to help her with homework, I was also the one they use as a weapon against her. You see how easy it is for Lisa. Why can't you try harder? I hated those words as much as she did. But hatred doesn't erase the sting of comparison. Over the years, Diana stopped seeing me as her sister. She saw me as the measuring stick she could never reach. And that resentment hardened into something sharp. I apologized to her many times as adults. Told her I was sorry I hadn't done more to stand up for her. But the truth is, when you're a kid in that system, you don't even realize the system is broken. You just follow orders and hope you won't be next. The breaking point came when I was about to leave for college. Diana was 16, quiet, withdrawn. The fire in her eyes had dimmed to embers. And then one night, everything collapsed. She swallowed a bottle of sleeping pills. I can still remember the sound of my mother's scream when she found her. The blur of sirens, the sterile white light of the hospital. The doctor's flat voice. She's alive. You got here just in time. It was like someone finally ripped the blindfold off my parents. For the first time, they saw not a lazy, stubborn daughter, but a child crushed under years of impossible standards. My mother sat in that hospital waiting room, shaking, whispering prayers to a God she hadn't spoken to in years. My father paced the hallway, blaming himself out loud, but never once admitting the way he had laughed at my mother's comparisons. After that, the rules changed, but in the worst possible way. Suddenly, Diana was untouchable. Fragile glass, a bird with broken wings. They wrapped her in bubble wrap and never let her take responsibility for anything again. Therapy sessions, yes. Softer voices, yes. But also endless excuses. Any wrong step was forgiven instantly. Any demand on her was considered dangerous. And I became invisible. The golden child who'd been weaponized was now treated like the safe one, the one who needed nothing, the one who could be abandoned emotionally because all their energy was poured into protecting Diana. Do you know what happens when parents swing from cruelty to overprotection? They don't heal the damage, they just create new fractures. Diana grew up believing her sadness was her shield, that any hint of accountability could be countered by a threat, a sigh, a reminder of pills in a bottle. And my parents lived in fear of pushing her too far again. She never went to college, threatened another suicide attempt when the idea was raised. She drifted from job to job, always quitting or getting fired, always cushioned by my parents' money. Rent-free, bill-free, consequence-free. And when they finally retired and their income shrank, who did they turn to me, the responsible one? But how could I keep sending money while Diana lounged on their couch, sipping cocktails with her party friends on their dime? How could I bankroll her permanent adolescence while raising a marriage of my own? And here's the darkest part. Diana knows exactly how to wield her history. She knows my parents won't push her, won't cut her off, won't call her out. Because deep down, they're terrified she'll do something drastic again. And she uses that fear like a leash. Ask yourself, what would you do if the person who once tried to end her life now uses that act as insurance against ever being held accountable? Do you protect her? Do you resent her? Or do you finally call it what it is? Manipulation. I wish I had an easy answer. But this is the cage we were made in. One sister turned into a weapon, the other turned into a victim who learned to weaponize her victimhood. And the parents? They're the guards still rattling the keys, pretending it's all under control. That's the family I was walking back into when the anniversary invitation came. That's the table where jokes about my husband would soon be made. And that's why I knew if the line got crossed again, I wasn't going to whisper apologies or swallow anger. I was going to break the cycle the only way left by burning the illusion down in front of everyone. The first time Diana met my husband, I noticed the change in her right away. Her laugh was louder, her shoulders leaned closer, her hand lingered on his arm, longer than politeness required. At first I brushed it off as nerves or awkwardness. But then I saw the glint in her eyes, the same glint kids get when they spot a new toy. Except this toy was my partner. From that moment on, it became a pattern. Every family dinner, every gathering. Diana would find an excuse to sit beside him, to touch his sleeve when she laughed, to comment on how handsome he looked. Sometimes, she'd make jokes that weren't jokes at all. Careful Lisa, she'd say, sipping her wine with a smirk. If you don't treat him right, I might just steal him. My husband would give an awkward laugh, pull away, and change the subject. But I felt the heat rise in my chest every time. When I called her out, she played it down. Relax, I'm just kidding, she'd say, twirling her hair like a teenager. Don't be so uptight. It wasn't a joke. And it wasn't harmless. What made it unbearable wasn't just Diana's behavior. It was the way my parents responded or didn't respond. They didn't shut it down. They didn't defend me. They encouraged it. One night, when my husband was still just my boyfriend, my mother smiled at him across the table and said, "You know, you'd actually be a better match for Diana. You two have the same kind of humor." My father chuckled and added, "Yeah, Diana would be more fun for you?" I remember the silence that followed. My husband froze. I stared at my parents like I didn't know them. "Are you serious?" I asked. My mother waved her hand dismissively. "We're just joking. Don't take everything so seriously." But it didn't stop there. Even on our wedding day moments before I walked down the aisle, my mother pulled my husband aside and whispered, "Are you sure you want to marry Lisa?" Like she was offering him a last-minute escape. Like Diana was the prize he should really be claiming. Can you imagine hearing that on the most important day of your life? The day meant to celebrate your love. When he told me later, I felt like the floor disappeared under my feet. I confronted my parents furious. They apologized eventually, promised it would never happen again. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to move forward. but promises meant nothing. At Diana's next birthday, they went out of their way to push him closer to her, arranging photos and videos where she was glued to his side. When he refused, they acted like he was overreacting. My mother even tried to justify it afterward. Diana's never had a boyfriend, she said softly, as though pity excused everything. She just has a little crush on him. Maybe being around him will motivate her to improve herself to find someone like him. My father wasn't any better. What's the harm in standing next to her for a picture? It makes her happy, he said. But whose happiness mattered more, their fragile daughter's or mine? I stopped visiting after that. No birthdays, no dinners, no casual drop-ins. We cut ourselves off. My husband agreed wholeheartedly. He told me once, "It's not that I think she could take me from you. It's that they're all so comfortable disrespecting you in front of me." That's the part I can't stand. He was right. It wasn't just about Diana's crush. It was about my parents laughing at my pain, treating my marriage like a game, making my husband the punchline of their twisted family joke. You know what hurts most? It wasn't ignorance. They knew it made me uncomfortable. They knew it crossed a line. And they still kept doing it. Ask yourself, if your own parents encouraged your sister to chase your husband, would you still sit at their table smiling? Would you let them brush it off as humor? Or would you finally draw a line in the sand and say, enough for years, I tried to avoid the fight? But avoidance doesn't erase disrespect. It just postpones it. And when the anniversary invitation arrived, I knew avoidance was over. This was going to be the stage where the truth came out. And for once, I wasn't afraid of the fallout. Walking into that house after so long felt like stepping onto a stage where I already knew the script. Smiles would be 2 wide hugs too tight. And beneath it all, the same undercurrent of disrespect. My mother nearly squealed when she saw me. "Lisa, you came," she exclaimed, pulling me into an embrace that smelled of perfume and desperation. My father patted my husband's back like nothing had ever happened. For a moment, I let them believe it. I smiled, sat down, made small talk with relatives I hadn't seen in years. My cousins asked about work, my aunts complimented my dress. And for the briefest second, I thought maybe we'd survive this dinner without chaos. Then came the slip. It always does. It started harmlessly enough. One aunt teased Diana about being the only cousin still single. "Maybe you've got someone hiding," she said with a laugh. Another chimed in. "Come on, Diana. When's the wedding?" Diana gave a coy smile, blushing like a teenager caught passing notes in class. She didn't deny it. She didn't redirect. She just basked in the attention. And then, like she'd been waiting for her cue, my mother leaned forward, eyes sparkling. "Oh, I don't know if she has a boyfriend, but she's always had a big crush on Lisa's husband." The words hit like a glass shattering on tile. She pointed at my husband, laughed and added, "Honestly, it's been going on for years." My father joined in, pounding the table with laughter. A couple of relatives chuckled awkwardly, like they weren't sure if they were supposed to. Diana stayed quiet, but her smile lingered. She didn't stop them. She didn't say, "That's inappropriate." She just enjoyed it. My face burned, my hands curled into fists under the table. My husband stared straight ahead, jaw tight. We had rehearsed for this, prepared for this exact moment. Still hearing it out loud in front of everyone felt like being slapped. I took a deep breath, then let it out loud enough to still the chatter. "How dare you?" I said, my voice cutting through the room. "How dare you talk about my husband like that?" The laughter died instantly. Heads turned, forks froze halfway to mouths. "You promised me," I continued, locking eyes with my parents. "Both of you. You swore you'd never cross this line again. You said you'd respect us, respect our marriage. And here we are, same disgusting jokes, same humiliation." Silence. No one moved. Even Diana's smirk faltered. I turned to the room. "Let me ask you something," I said, sweeping my gaze over my aunts, uncles, cousins. "How many of you think it's normal, acceptable for a grown woman to openly pine for her sister's husband, and for her parents to laugh about it like it's funny? Is this how your families work? Is this the standard?" No one answered. A few looked down at their plates. My aunt, the one who started the teasing, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. And then I faced Diana. My voice dropped, but the words carried. "You've been acting like a predator for years. You flirt with him, text him at night, try to touch him even when he tells you to stop. And you hide behind the excuse of a joke. Tell me, Diana, was it a joke when you sent him messages while I was asleep in the next room? Was it funny when you leaned into him so close he had to move seats? Was it hilarious when you used my parents' laughter as your shield?" Her face crumpled, but I wasn't finished. "And you too?" I pointed at my parents. "How many times have you said he'd be better off with her? On our wedding day, no less. Do you understand how twisted that is? How disrespectful to both me and to him?" My father's face flushed crimson. He opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "Don't even try, unless you want me to bring up your own skeletons." He froze. My mother went pale, her hand trembling around her wine glass. She knew what was coming. And then, my husband leaned forward, voice calm but sharp as glass. "If we're sharing family jokes," he said, "maybe we should all laugh about how your innocent crushes turned into something more years ago. Isn't that right, Mrs. Davis? Or should I say, remember the neighbor?" The air cracked. My mother's smile collapsed. My father's fists clenched on the table. Gasps rippled around us. Everyone knew what he meant. The secret affair. The one my parents had buried years ago. "You don't get to rewrite history," my husband continued. "You don't get to make my marriage a punchline while pretending your own was spotless." My mother's voice rose, shaky with rage. "How dare you bring that up? That was years ago? And this is now?" I snapped. You crossed the line the second you made my husband a prop for your twisted games. You think Diana's crush is funny? You think it's harmless? Well, here's what's not funny. The years of discomfort, the disrespect, the fact that you've enabled her behavior like it was nothing. The table sat frozen, eyes darting between us, waiting to see what came next. Ask yourself, what would you have done? Sat quietly, smiled politely, let the joke pass. Or would you have torn the mask off in front of everyone even if it meant exposing the ugliest family secrets? Because in that moment, I chose truth over silence. And there was no going back. The silence didn't last. It never does. It shattered with my father's fist slamming against the table, rattling glasses and plates. Enough, he barked, his voice booming. You don't come into this house, into my home, and spit on your mother like this. I stared back at him, unflinching. She spat on me first, Dad, for years, and you stood by and laughed. He went red, veins visible on his neck. My mother, meanwhile, had dropped the mask completely. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't the tears of guilt. They were the crocodile tears of someone trying to salvage dignity in front of a crowd. She pressed a napkin dramatically to her face. This is how you repay us. We invited you into our home. We wanted peace. Peace? I interrupted, almost laughing. You call mocking my marriage peace? You call enabling Diana's obsession a peace? Diana finally found her voice. You always act like the victim, she hissed. Her eyes were wild cheeks, blotchy with anger. You love drama. You love painting me as some creep when all I ever wanted was a little attention. Maybe if you weren't so selfish, Mom and Dad wouldn't— Don't you dare, I snapped. Don't you dare shift this on me. You're 30 years old, Diana. Not a child. Not some fragile glass doll. You're a grown woman who thinks sending late-night texts to her sister's husband is normal. That's not attention-seeking. That's disgusting. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came. For once, she didn't have a comeback. My aunt, the one who had laughed earlier, tried to cut the tension. Maybe we should all calm down. Calm down, my husband shot back. His voice was steady cold. Would you be calm if someone told your daughter's husband he belonged with another woman? Would you laugh if your sister sent your husband messages about how handsome he was? The color drained from her face. She shook her head slowly. No, of course not. Exactly. My father stood his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. You think you're so perfect, he snarled. Maybe your husband should know how much you complained about him before you married. How you said he wasn't ambitious enough that you were settling. Should we share that with the table? It was a low blow, petty, and wrong. I had confided doubts in my mother years ago during a fight, never imagining she would poison my father with them. My husband glanced at me, his brow furrowed. I met his eyes. I said those things when I was scared. I admitted, my voice shaking but firm. And I was wrong. I married him because I saw the man he is not the man you wanted him to be. And he's been more of a partner, more of a protector than either of you ever taught me a man could be. My husband reached under the table, squeezed my hand. That simple gesture spoke louder than any defense I could have made. My mother's sobs turned shrill. This is what you've done to our family. You've humiliated us. In front of everyone. I turned on her, rage simmering into something sharper, colder. No, Mom. You humiliated yourselves. I just stopped covering for you. Around us, relatives sat frozen, unsure whether to side with the hosts or with the truth that had just been laid bare. Some avoided eye contact. Others looked at me with something that resembled pity or maybe admiration. Diana slammed her hands on the table, her voice cracking. You've ruined everything. You couldn't just let me have my moment for once, could you? I laughed bitterly. Your moment. That's what you call trying to steal my husband's attention at our parents' anniversary party. Pathetic. You're jealous, she spat. You've always been jealous because I'm fun, because I'm free, because people actually like me. I leaned forward. If you're so fun and free, why do you still live off our parents at 30? Why do you chase men who don't want you instead of building a life of your own? Tell me, Diana, what's left of you if you're not clinging to other people's marriages? The words hit harder than I intended. She went pale, her mouth trembling, but she didn't deny it. She couldn't. My father looked like he might explode again, but this time, my husband stood. His voice carried over the entire table. We're done here. We came because you asked, because we thought maybe this family could behave like adults for one night. But clearly, that was asking too much. He helped me to my feet. I looked around the table one last time. You all heard it? You all saw it? Don't let them rewrite this tomorrow. Don't let them spin me as the ungrateful daughter or him as the disrespectful son-in-law. Remember this night exactly as it happened. And with that, we left. The shouting resumed behind us as we walked out the door. My mother's wails, my father's curses, Diana's shrill accusations, it all blended into one chaotic chorus. But as soon as the night air hit my face, I felt lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying their shame. I had handed it back to them. Ask yourself, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent for the sake of appearances? Or would you have dragged the truth into the light, no matter how ugly it looked? Because once it's out there, secrets can't be buried again. The drive home was quiet. Not an awkward quiet, more like the quiet after a storm when the world feels raw and rearranged. My husband's hand stayed on mine the entire way, his thumb tracing slow circles, grounding me in the moment. Neither of us spoke until the headlights of our street finally came into view. Then he exhaled long and heavy. Well, he said softly, we ripped the Band-Aid off. I laughed, a shaky sound, half relief and half disbelief. More like we tore open the whole wound. That night, we barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the dinner the way my mother's face crumpled when my husband mentioned the neighbor, the way Diana's smile collapsed when I called her out. But instead of guilt, I felt a strange calm. For once, I hadn't swallowed my anger. I hadn't let them write the story. The silence from my parents in the days that followed was deafening. Normally, my mother would call to guilt trip me. My father would send a scathing message, and Diana would fire off some passive-aggressive text. But this time, nothing. Just 2 missed calls that went to voicemail, both of which I ignored. When I finally listened, I almost laughed. My mother's voice was syrupy, sweet, too careful, like she was trying to convince herself she wasn't still humiliated. "Lisa, darling, I think we should talk. Things got heated, but families fight, right? That's what makes us strong. Call me back." I didn't. Instead, the first messages came from the relatives. One cousin texted, "I'm sorry I didn't say anything. You were right to call it out." Another aunt emailed me to apologize for laughing along with my mother. She admitted she'd felt uncomfortable but hadn't wanted to make a scene. Her exact words, "Now I wish I had." Not all the responses were supportive. One uncle called me dramatic, accused me of airing dirty laundry in front of company. As if the real problem was me speaking up, not my mother announcing her daughter's crush on my husband. I didn't bother replying. But the messages that mattered most were the quiet ones, the ones from family members who had stayed silent at the table, now reaching out privately to say they'd seen it too. They'd thought it was wrong, but they hadn't known how to speak up. That was the power of the truth. Once spoken, it couldn't be denied. Meanwhile, Diana didn't stay quiet for long. Within a week, my husband received the first letter. Handwritten messy, like the frantic scribbles of someone desperate to be heard. She told him she was sorry for making things awkward, but claimed she couldn't help how she felt about him. That it was love and not something shameful. That she hoped someday he would see she was the better match. The words made my skin crawl. We didn't respond. We documented. Scanned the letter, filed it away, added it to the growing pile of evidence in case this ever went further. A few days later came another letter. This one darker. She accused me of poisoning him against her, of controlling him, of being jealous. At the bottom, she had drawn a crooked little heart with both their initials inside. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside felt like her footsteps. Every shadow felt like her watching. Ask yourself, how would you react if your own sister started crossing from creepy to dangerous? Would you confront her? Or would you start preparing for something worse? My parents, of course, pretended it wasn't happening. My mother left one more voicemail. "You know, Diana, she gets dramatic. She doesn't mean harm. Don't make this bigger than it is." That was the moment I realized they weren't just blind. They were complicit. They would protect Diana no matter what line she crossed. So we drew our own line. We called a lawyer. We filed a report. We started the process of a restraining order. And just like that, the silence around us turned into shadows. A quiet so heavy, it felt like waiting for the next shoe to drop. The first time Diana showed up at our house, it was early evening. My husband had just pulled into the driveway after work, and there she was sitting on our front porch like she belonged there. He froze in the car, called me right away, his voice tight. "She's here. She's just sitting, waiting." By the time I rushed home, he was circling the block, too afraid to get out with her so close. And Diana, she wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't apologetic. She was smiling like this was some kind of romantic movie, and he was the leading man arriving to sweep her off her feet. When she saw my car, she stood up, smoothed her hair, and started walking toward me. I locked the doors immediately. She mouthed something, "Talk to me, please." Then she reached for the handle of my car. That was it. I hit the horn long and loud until a neighbor stepped out onto their porch. Only then did she back away, her face shifting from fake sweetness to something darker, almost hateful. We called the police. With the letters already documented, it didn't take long to file a report. They held her for a few days. My parents bailed her out, of course. But the damage was done. Do you know what it feels like when your own blood suddenly feels like a threat? It's a betrayal so deep, it shakes the foundation of who you are. You grow up believing family is safe, even when they're cruel, even when they're toxic. But when they cross into danger, when you realize they might actually harm the life you've built, that illusion dies. The restraining order came through a week later. For the first time in years, I slept without waking at every creak in the house. My husband and I thought maybe, just maybe, it was over. But obsession doesn't burn out quietly. It flares. A month later, another letter arrived. This one wasn't left in the mailbox. It was taped to our front door. The handwriting was shaky, the words underlined over and over again. "You can't keep him from me forever. He belongs with me." Everyone knows it, even mom and dad. She signed it with a heart, then added, "I'll wait as long as it takes." That's when fear turned into resolve. We handed it straight to our lawyer. We made copies, we added cameras to every corner of the house, and still my parents acted like we were the problem. My mother left yet another voicemail. Her voice brittle and sharp this time. "You're ruining your sister's life. She's fragile. Stop escalating this. Escalating." I wanted to scream. We weren't the ones sitting on porches, taping letters to doors, chasing someone else's husband down the driveway. But that's the twisted thing about enablers. They'll flip the story until the victim looks like the aggressor. They'll call you cruel for drawing boundaries when all you're doing is protecting your life. Then came the breaking point. It was late fall, already dark outside, when my husband called me from work. His voice was panicked low. She was here again, waiting in the parking lot. He described how he walked out to his car only to find Diana leaning against the hood. She tried to touch his arm, begged him not to leave. He had to shove past her, jump inside, lock the doors. Security footage confirmed it. She'd been lurking for almost an hour. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the footage playing on loop. My husband's figure walking toward the car, Diana stepping into his path, her body language desperate, almost predatory. My stomach knotted tighter each time I watched it. Ask yourself, what would you do if your sibling stalked your spouse? Would you still call it just a crush? Would you still laugh at family dinners? We didn't laugh. We called the police. Again. This time she violated the restraining order, which meant jail time. Which meant my parents lost the bail money they'd scraped together. And here's the part that twisted the knife when the police took her. Diana didn't cry, didn't beg. She smiled. Smiled like she'd won something I couldn't yet see. For days I kept asking myself, what does she know that I don't? The legal process moved slowly, but the financial fallout hit fast. My parents hired an expensive lawyer to defend Diana, convinced she was just misunderstood. They burned through savings at a speed that stunned me. Retirement funds that were supposed to last 20 years evaporated in months. And the irony, it wasn't even effective. The lawyer couldn't make the evidence disappear. The letters, the porch visit, the workplace footage. A restraining order violation is still a violation. All the polished arguments in the world couldn't scrub away the fact that my sister had crossed the line again and again. When I heard the estimate of their legal fees, $10,000, maybe $20,000, I didn't feel sorry for them. Not anymore. Because while they were emptying their accounts for Diana, they never once asked how the stress was affecting me and my husband. Never once considered that the victim deserved the same loyalty they lavished on the aggressor. At night, I'd lie awake, listening to my husband breathe steady but shallow, the kind of sleep that's not really rest. Sometimes he'd jerk awake, mutter something about headlights in the driveway, then roll over with his arm clamped tightly around me, like he thought I might slip away. That's what her obsession cost us, not just safety, but peace. And the guilt seeped in. I hated myself for it, but sometimes I thought, what if I had just cut her off sooner? What if I had kept my parents at arm's length years ago? Maybe then my husband wouldn't be looking over his shoulder, wondering if his stalker happened to share my bloodline. The family began to fracture under the weight of it all. My father, always the quieter one, looked worn hollow. My mother, though, was as defiant as ever. She left me a voicemail one night that made my blood run cold. She's your sister. You're destroying her life. One day, you'll regret this. Destroying her life. Diana was the one showing up at doorsteps, lurking at offices, scribbling desperate notes in shaky handwriting. But in my mother's twisted narrative, I was the executioner, the cold-hearted daughter who chose her husband over her own flesh and blood. Maybe I was, and maybe I didn't care. The trial dragged on, each update a new splinter in the fragile wood of our family. My husband and I met with lawyers, prepared statements, showed up to hearings. Each time I sat across the courtroom from Diana. She looked different there, less like my sister, more like a stranger trying to play innocent. She'd fold her hands, tilt her head, pretend to be meek. But then her eyes would flick toward my husband and the act would crack. Just a flash of hunger, of fixation, before she lowered her gaze again. And in those moments, I knew the truth: obsession isn't love. It's rot. The judge eventually ordered therapy as part of her sentence. I wanted to feel relief, but all I felt was exhaustion, because therapy only works if the patient wants to change. And Diana, she was still writing letters even from the holding cell. Meanwhile, the financial toll crushed my parents. Their house went on the market. Friends stopped answering their calls. Relatives who once laughed along at family jokes now avoided them like they carried a disease. I thought I might feel satisfaction at their downfall. Instead, I felt nothing, just empty. Because this wasn't victory, it was ruin. And in that ruin, I realized something: truth always has a cost. Sometimes the cost is paid by the guilty, sometimes by the innocent, often by both. For me, the cost was sleepless night, strained nerves, the slow erosion of whatever fragile connections still tethered me to my parents. For them, it was money, reputation, and the last shreds of dignity they once had. And for Diana, the cost hadn't fully landed yet. But it would. I could see it coming, the way you can smell a storm before it breaks. It started quietly, almost imperceptibly. A few curt words exchanged in court hallways. Averted eyes in the kitchen when my father and mother thought no one was watching. Then, like a crack running through glass, their marriage split in a matter of months. I wasn't surprised. My father had always been a man of quiet endurance. But even endurance has its limits. Watching his savings drain into legal fees, listening to whispers in town about his wife defending a grown daughter's obsession, it was more than he could shoulder. One afternoon, he called me, his voice steadier than I expected. "I can't do it anymore," he said. 30 years of marriage, and this is what it's come to. Covering for her, defending her, pretending this is normal. I didn't say anything at first. I just let the silence sit between us. Then I realized it wasn't me he was talking to. He was talking to himself, saying it out loud for the first time. When the divorce papers came, my mother was livid. She screamed about betrayal, about loyalty, about how he was abandoning Diana when she needed him most. But my father didn't budge. He packed his things in quiet dignity, left the house, and never looked back. For the first time in my life, I saw my father choose himself over the wreckage my mother and sister had created. The divorce exposed more than just their failing relationship. It tore open secrets, long-buried debts. They'd hidden arguments, they'd hushed the rot they painted over with polite smiles at church and barbecues. And now the whole town knew. My relatives, once split down the middle, began to lean toward me. Not because they suddenly liked me more, but because siding with Diana had become indefensible. It's hard to defend someone who shows up on police reports and courtroom transcripts. The shift was slow, but undeniable. Invitations stopped arriving from my mother. My aunt, who had once laughed at the anniversary dinner, called me late one night to apologize, her voice thick with shame. I should have spoken up, she admitted. I let her humiliate you. I let her humiliate your husband. I thought it was harmless. I was wrong. Her words were clumsy, but they mattered. For once, I wasn't the one apologizing. Meanwhile, Diana's grip on my mother tightened. They became inseparable, two women bound by desperation and denial. I heard rumors of them moving into a small rental a few towns away, struggling to pay bills, clinging to each other as if that bond could make the world forget. But the world hadn't forgotten. Employers Googled her name, neighbors whispered, friends drifted away. And my mother, once the iron-willed matriarch of our family, was reduced to begging favors from people who didn't want to be seen with her. I should have felt pity. Instead, I felt clarity. This was the endgame of denial, of enabling, of choosing fantasy over truth. One evening, I sat with my husband on our porch, watching the sunset bleed into the horizon. He squeezed my hand and said, "It's strange. They thought we'd be the ones isolated. But look at us. We're the ones still standing." He was right. For all the chaos, for all the pain, we had come out stronger. And they had only themselves. Still, sometimes at night, I'd picture Diana as a little girl, the one forced to stand in the corner while I sat at the table with my books. And I'd wonder if this was inevitable, if the cracks had been forming all along, long before obsession took root. Bloodlines may bind us, but they can also poison us. And mine had fractured beyond repair. For a while, it seemed quiet. Too quiet. Diana was attending therapy sessions as ordered. My mother had gone back to part-time work, and word around town was that they were keeping a low profile. I wanted to believe it was over, that finally we could breathe without wondering who might show up on our porch. But obsession rarely fades. It festers. It was late spring when it happened. My husband pulled into our driveway after work and immediately froze. Diana was sitting on our porch, swing legs crossed, hands clasped, like she was waiting for a date. She looked thinner, jittery, her eyes darting up as soon as she saw his car. He didn't even get out. He reversed so fast he almost clipped the mailbox, heart pounding as he called me. I could hear the fear in his voice, the sharp edge of panic that only comes when the past refuses to stay buried. We called the police immediately. The restraining order was still active. This wasn't just a visit, it was a violation. Within an hour, she was in custody again, handcuffed, while my mother screamed at the officers from the sidewalk. She just wanted to talk, she shrieked. But the law didn't care about her excuses anymore. The arrest should have been the end. But the truth is, it was only the breaking point. Because this time, the judge wasn't lenient. Diana had crossed too many lines. Her therapy was extended indefinitely. And she served real time. 6 months, part pre-trial, part sentencing. It wasn't much, but it was enough to brand her permanently. During that stretch, my parents' finances collapsed entirely. Bail money, lost legal fees, mounting house gone. My father finalized the divorce and disappeared out of state. My mother clung to Diana, dragging her from one rental to another, both of them shadows of the people they used to be. And me, I was caught between fury and pity. Because for all her delusions, Diana was still my sister. I remembered her as a child, cheeks red from running outside, hair tangled, laughing before the bitterness set in. I remembered begging my mother to stop comparing us, to stop crushing her spirit. And I wondered if this, her obsession, her collapse, wasn't just the final act of a tragedy written years ago. But then I'd see my husband's face when he talked about finding her on the porch, the way his hand shook when he recounted how close she'd come to his car. And the pity evaporated. Obsession wasn't innocence. It was violence in disguise. The night after her sentencing, I sat in the nursery we were preparing. Because in the middle of all this chaos, life had found a way forward. I was pregnant. The thought of bringing a child into this mess terrified me, but it also anchored me. This baby would never grow up in the shadow of Diana's fixation or my mother's denial. I would make sure of it. That night, I whispered to my unborn child, "You will never feel second place. You will never be told you are less. And no one will be allowed to poison your worth." It was a promise forged out of fire, one I intend to keep. Diana's obsession ended not with love, not with reconciliation, but with cold steel bars and a permanent record. And in that ending, I saw something clear. Sometimes family doesn't heal. Sometimes it corrodes until there's nothing left but wreckage, and you have to choose whether to stay buried in the rubble or step into the light. It's strange the way silence becomes a shield. After everything, the anniversary dinner, the restraining order, the trial, even the divorce, I find myself sitting in a home that feels calmer than I ever thought possible. My husband and I laugh over small things again. The baby cries in the middle of the night, and instead of dread, I feel a kind of grounding. Life is ours now without the constant shadow of my sister's fixation or my parents' dismissive cruelty. But peace, I've learned, is not the same as forgetting. My sister still exists somewhere out there, tethered to my mother like a storm cloud waiting to burst. My father left town trying to rebuild a life that isn't tied to shame. And my mother. She clings to Diana with the same blindness that caused all of this, as if shielding her will somehow erased the wreckage left behind. Sometimes I wonder if my parents ever sit in their quiet kitchen and think about the daughter they lost, not through death, but through their own choices. Do they realize the price of treating boundaries like a joke? Do they understand the cost of raising one child in comparison to another, of weaponizing guilt until it shattered everyone in its path? Or do they still tell themselves the story that I'm cruel, that I walked away for no reason? People ask me if I'll ever forgive them. The truth is, forgiveness is too small a word for what was broken. Forgiveness implies a repair, a chance to rebuild. But some houses burn so completely, you don't rebuild. You just leave the ashes behind. And yet late at night, holding my child, I still catch myself thinking of Diana. Not with pity, not with rage, but with something colder. I wonder what would have happened if my parents had set limits, if they had pushed her to grow instead of excusing every boundary she crossed. Would she have still fixated on my husband? Or would she have found another life, one where she wasn't chasing someone who never wanted her? That's the part that lingers. Not the fights, not the courtroom, not the public fallout. It's the simple, unresolved question: how much of Diana's obsession was her own, and how much of it was made by the family that enabled her? I may never know. And maybe that's the real punishment. Not for me, but for them. They get to live with the uncertainty, with the gnawing silence of what might have been. Because in the end, I built a life without them. A real one. And they're left with the wreckage of their choices, still pretending it was all just a joke. So let me ask you, what would you do if your own family turned your pain into entertainment? If they laughed at your boundaries until your life was in danger, would you ever let them back in? Or would you like me choose silence over tradition, even if it means being called heartless forever? That's the question I leave with you. Thank you for watching and supporting these full story dramas. Your comments and encouragement mean the world. I read every single one.